Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Late Sunday afternoon, Billy Napier, the Florida Gators, landing another commitment in the 2026 cycle. This one coming from a personal favorite of mine. And to the Florida fans who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of months, y'all certainly know this. Three-star offensive lineman G Carr from IMG Academy. Not necessarily the flashiest commitment that you'll see in the 2026 cycle. This kid, to me, is as blue chip as it gets. And what I mean by blue chip is not necessarily four-star prospect, but I look at G Carr and say, this kid is going to be a multi-year starter for Florida on the inside of this offensive line. He's a guy that I would, the player comp that I would throw out for G Carr is probably Najee Harris. How we talked about Najee Harris a couple of years ago coming from IMG Academy is a very similar way that we're about to talk about G Carr. Guy that probably is not going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, but a guy that you feel pretty dang good is going to be a multi-year starter on the offensive line. You look at Najee Harris, started every single game as a redshirt freshman, provided he's healthy. I'm going to start every single game as a redshirt sophomore, going to be a stalwart for Florida on the offensive line for multiple years. You get the same vibe from a guy like G Carr. And the reason I think that's so important to note is when we're talking about the offensive line position at the high school ranks, it's so much projection. It's so much boom or bust. It's so difficult to figure out what guys are going to make the transition, especially to the SEC at a high level, when you have the ability to go get a guy like G Carr that you just feel dang confident is going to be a very solid football player for you on the inside of the offensive line. You take that every single time. And I would argue when you look at a guy like G Carr, the rankings are probably a little low on him because you look at all the programs that are interested in this kid, the blue bloods of college football. And so I look at it and say, all right, 24/7 sports might be a little bit lower on G Carr. Look at the Power Four programs across the country that were recruiting him and say, I think he is pretty highly valued across the country. I'll say this about Billy Napier in Florida: as much of a roller coaster as it's been for Billy Napier during his tenure in Gainesville, one thing that he's really gotten right, and really part of the reason I think Billy Napier turns the corner with this program, is they've recruited and developed on the offensive line at an extremely high level. I mean, you look at the offensive line, they're going to be trotting out there in the 2025 year. Ain't no transfers on it. It's homegrown talent that they've recruited out of high school and developed within this program. There are a lot of programs that have to go out to the transfer portal and try to add like 2 or 3 starting caliber guys in the portal. Billy Napier's never in that position because the evaluations in the development that they've had at the high school ranks. Last thing I'll say before we get a little bit more nitty gritty into G Carr, there were a lot of people across the country, including some Florida fans, and I don't necessarily blame Florida fans for feeling this way. There were a lot of people that were concerned about Florida having one commitment in the 2026 cycle heading into the summer. And yeah, that was not an ideal situation for Florida to be in. We've seen Billy Napier get on absolute heaters. Go back to how Florida closed that 2025 cycle. I don't think I've seen a program get hotter on the recruiting trail than what Florida did. Go back 2 summers ago during this official visit season. We saw Florida rip off a bunch of commitments. And so although Florida was sitting there with one commitment, you feel like there's some real momentum that's building within this program. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're breaking down a lot of commitments over the next couple of days and weeks. Now, I want to get into G Carr. Want to talk about a few other names that could be committing to Florida over the next couple of days before we get into it, as always. To the Florida fans, many of y'all know that this program's been a blast for myself to talk about. Whether it's on the football field, whether it's on the recruiting trail, I can't thank the Florida fans enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I have a feeling that we're going to be talking about a few more commitments over the next couple of weeks. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, G Carr, mauling, physically imposing offensive lineman who is 6'4", 330, but gets out of his stance exceptionally well. And you can tell, I mean, coming from IMG Academy, you can tell this kid's a pretty polished offensive lineman. IMG Academy has a phenomenal track record with their offensive linemen playing at a high level, not only at the collegiate ranks, but at the NFL ranks as well. So just having that time at IMG Academy makes you feel pretty good that G Carr is going to make this transition to the collegiate ranks pretty dang smoothly. Now, what's interesting about G Carr, and look, I'll say this first. I do think he'll play on the inside of the offensive line. You turn on the junior year film, he's playing a lot of tackle. It doesn't look that weird. And nor what I mean by that is normally when you're talking about these guys coming out of high school that project as interior offensive linemen, they'll play tackle at the high school ranks because they're the best offensive linemen on their high school football teams. But you can tell it ain't going to be tackle in college. You watch G Carr and say, he looks pretty comfortable out there in space at the tackle position. Again, I'm not saying he's going to play tackle for Florida over the next couple of years, but I think that conversation of position versatility might mean something. Kind of like a guy like Bryce Lovett, who we thought was going to be a guard. Sounds like he's going to start at right tackle for Florida. Sounds like he's going to be a pretty dang good starting right tackle. I would project G Carr to play on the inside at that guard position. Wouldn't be surprised if he plays tackle. Really, really physical. Also works at the second level well, pulls around to play side really well, which are, things that Florida wants to do in the run game. And I think the overall take on G Carr is that this kid moves bodies in the run game. Whether it's double teams working up to linebackers, whether it's just straight up down blocking, kind of dominating at the point of attack, we know Florida wants to run the football. You're getting an offensive lineman that's going to help you do that over the next couple of years. Now, who are the other names to keep an eye on? I would start talk about running the football. Carson Baker. This was a guy that, Ohio State was in on in a pretty good way. Georgia was in on pretty hard. Obviously, being a Georgia kid, it sounds like Florida is by far the leader in the clubhouse here. What fires me up about Carson Baker is he's so easy to sell to the Florida fans. You're talking 6'1", you're talking 200 pounds, you're talking a 10.6 in the 100-meter dash. One of the fastest running backs, if not the fastest, in the 2026 cycle. There is probably some development that needs to take place with this kid and his feel at the position. You turn on the high school film and say, it's a lot of bouncing out to the perimeter. It's a lot of using that speed, of which I don't blame him for doing because he's the fastest football player on the field. Probably needs to get a little bit more comfortable slamming it up in there between the tackles. You're betting on a running back that goes 6 foot, 200 pounds, runs a 10.6 every time. There's a reason I think every program in the country wants Carson Baker, and I think there's a reason that Florida has really turned it up. And one thing I'll note here is these official visits that Florida is hosting, they got to be dynamite. Now, look, I ain't getting invited to these official visits. Unfortunately, Billy Napier, I'm not too high on his recruiting board. But from what you're hearing coming out of these visits, guys are coming in like Carson Baker, before he took his visit in the middle of May, I think was a long shot for Florida. Now, all of a sudden, he's a guy that sounds like he might be committing to Florida. You look at G Carr and say, yeah, Florida was probably the leader in the clubhouse for this one throughout the last couple of months, but you saw Tennessee really turn it up for this kid. Takes an official visit to Florida, commits Sunday afternoon. Whatever they're doing, whether it's the photo shoots, whether it's the food they're feeding these kids, like it's working. They got this recipe of official visits down. Other name I'll throw out there, Kaden Hall, safety from Milton, Florida. Interesting kid, right? He's a guy that can do a couple of different things. I wonder if he just puts on weight and becomes an off-ball linebacker for two different reasons. One, we know Ron Roberts in this Florida Gators coaching staff values athleticism at the linebacker position. And then I look at Kaden Hall and say, this is a kid that he's a really big kid. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. Do I think he's elite in man coverage? No, probably not. but I think he could be a really good off-ball linebacker, and he looks like a body that could handle 230 pounds really well. And so look at Kaden Hall, really, really good athlete. I think there's a reason there's a lot of Power 4 programs going after him, including Florida. A lot of different things you could do with Kaden Hall, whether it's just spinning down and playing off-ball linebacker, whether it's being like a box overhang safety that kind of gets involved in the run game. This kid wants to attack the line of scrimmage. That's where he is at his best. Is he the best as a cover one single high safety? No, probably not. Is he the best as a safety operating in man coverage? No, probably not. But he does have a unique set of skills that you like a lot. We'll see how that one goes. Break it down if it happens. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.